Hey, it's John and Mike again from Brew-Dudes.com. Shoot another video this week. So what are we talking about this week, Mr. John?
Home brewing, the hobby, is all about upgrading equipment. Or you start the hobby and you say, oh, I'm just going to get a kit, and you get the starter equipment set, and then you make some all right beer, and you say like, well, I'm learning more about this. There's more equipment than I can buy. And then you say to yourself, well, I got to buy more equipment because if I buy this piece of equipment, I can make better beer. And then it sort of dominoes from that. So I'm at another crossroads. Last year, I think I wanted to buy either a new grain mill or a refractometer, and I put that out to people, and grain mill won overwhelmingly, and I'm glad I did. I actually feel like I make better beer with buying grain that has not been milled and milling it right before I brew. I feel like the quality of the beer is better because of that. It's fresher, at least it,
That's a good experiment. We could do that. We could actually do that.
We could do that. We could buy from our local homebrew shop.
We could crush some, let it sit in a bucket for a week.
Yep, or
in a plastic bag, like you
online,
get it.
you could buy some crushed grains, and who knows what you're getting. So
it's not a good experiment.
How isn't it? You just want to get it crushed somehow.
No. We buy 20 pounds of grain. We crush 10 pounds of it.
Yeah.
And let it sit for a week. And the other 10 pounds doesn't. We crush that day on brew day. Yeah.
Okay.
You got to control these things.
You figure out the experiments, and I just will be there to help out.
Okay.
How about that? Anyway, the grain mill was a good purchase. I have not bought a refractometer. I don't know if I will. I want to, but it's not a top priority. Now, the next debate, because we feel like that fermentation is a very important part of making great beer, and yeast management is another good part of it.
No fermentation, no beer.
True, but if you improve your fermentation, you improve your final beer as well. The two things I've been thinking about is either getting a Ferm belt, some kind of way to control fermentations in cold temperatures rather than keeping things cold like in a fridge, which I have. Mm-hmm. Especially in the wintertime, you're trying to get something that's to be like 68 degrees in your basement. That's just not happening. And I've done the cheap way of just taking a heating pad and putting it next to it, but it's not, I don't have the controller to set it up.
Active heating, man.
Yes, I'd rather have something that's built for fermenters. You put it around, a nice jacket, you get some kind of way to, override the thermostat so that it only heats when it needs to keep it at a constant temperature, So that's one piece of, like, a Ferm belt versus a stir plate, so I can have pretty sweet yeast starters. Mm-hmm. So Michael, if you were in this situation where you had to choose, am I going to buy this, the Ferm belt, or this, the stir plate for starters, which one would you purchase?
I would go with the active heating control, the active temperature control, because you're already doing a good job managing your yeast. I'm talking about you specifically. You're already doing starters. We kind of talked about it off camera. You're doing like a static starter, in a jug. You shake it once in a while. That does work pretty well. It's not the best way, but the differences between the best way and the way you're doing it is not actually that significant.
Have we experimented? Have we tested that?
We haven't. We haven't.
But
tested
you're
that.
pretty sure.
But we could.
You're
test
pretty
it.
sure.
But that test becomes, somewhat empirical because, or it becomes a little bit. It is that word again. That test becomes hard to judge because unless you really know cell counts.
Yeah.
When people talk about different ways of propagating yeast, unless you're actually counting the cells, not relying on a calculator that's assuming that its conditions and your conditions are the same, it's very difficult for that to be heads up straight. Anyway, I think that overall the fermentation, because here's the deal, you could always pitch 2 vials of yeast, okay? Mm-hmm. But if you don't have temp control, you could get by without a starter and pitch 2 vials of yeast. But if you pitch 2 vials of yeast without temp control, and you needed it to be at 68, but it was at 58, it doesn't matter how many vials of yeast you put in there. So I would start with active temperature control. Because another thing too, when I ferment, I've gotten really accustomed to fermenting for the first 80% of the ferment at the temperature I want it to be at, and then ramping up towards the end, which I find really helps dry out and finish the beer. And actually the beer finishes faster because your conditioning time post the active phase of fermentation becomes shorter because the yeast kind of did their thing faster towards the end. So for anybody, actually, I think temperature control is always the best buy right away.
So it's not just the firm belt, but it's also some way to control that firm belt so that it stays at a static temperature of whatever I'm trying to set it for. So if the recipe or the yeast strain works best at, you know, say 68 degrees Fahrenheit, you want to be able to control that so it stays within that temperature, you know, I guess, setting. As far as long as
you tend to get incomplete fermentations too, even subtly incomplete. I mean, even just a couple gravity points of incompleteness. If the beer throughout its day is going up a little bit and then down a little bit, just
or
with
even
the
the week or
rise and fall of the sun and the temperature of your house, you know. So being able to keep it steady with a firm wrap or a firm belt or something like that, and a probe to monitor the temperature, that's the way to go.
All right. So I think that's the debate. So it's really about that.
Tell us what you think.
Yeah, leave a comment, please. Let's have some discussion. We'll talk to you. For John and Mike, brew-dudes.com. Brew on.
Cheers.